I'm now joined by the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell. Paul and Commissioner, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I just want to get your thoughts on what you made of Tom Homan there. He was speaking, what he had to say.
Well, I think really what it does signal is that there is going to be a change in enforcement tactics and some downsizing of the force of immigration officials that are in Minnesota, which we think is positive. But the state does have concerns about what does that drawdown look like. What does it mean from the standpoint of more transparency into the investigations of these shootings? We have committed to working collaboratively to address the immigration enforcement unit's efforts to the extent that we can.
And as a law enforcement leader, what have your conversations been like with local sheriffs and public safety officials in Minnesota and across the country regarding the fatal shooting of Alex Pretti?
Well, I mean, obviously, there is concern, and I think a lot of questions remain about the underlying objective and mission that ICE was doing and Customs and Border Patrol in these operations, and that has resulted in some considerable concern. We had concerns because some of that seemed to be driven by some inaccurate numbers that were put out by the Department of Homeland Security. I think we're getting to a place where there's a better understanding of what those numbers look like and what this means. But there remains concerns about how we approach this and how we go forward.
With tensions running high between federal agencies and local authorities, what do you see as a realistic path forward for state and local corrections to work with Homeland Security while maintaining public safety? Because as you said to me, there are still concerns.
Well, I think, first and foremost, I think it's important for people to recognize that the state has a longstanding practice. First, there's a state law that requires us to notify ICE when a non-citizen enters our custody, and we coordinate the safe transfer of custody if an ICE detainer has been put on a person in our custody. And so that has been a longstanding practice, and that will continue. That said, we are working across the state to make sure there's more uniformity in the management of both notification and custody transfers when that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the things that ICE is seeking, and I think there is general agreement that those are important objectives and things that we can improve and have better outcomes. At the same time, the way the tactics that have been used by sending out large groups of enforcement agents without coordination with local law enforcement, even from a safety standpoint, is and remains a concern. And so we really want to make sure that there is close coordination around their objectives, that there is some sense of who and where these targets are. We have concerns about ICE agents going into schools or school areas or school bus stops or churches or variety of other locations, hospitals, because it is unsettling and has created significant community concern. So if we can be more targeted in the enforcement, we recognize that ICE does have a legitimate and lawful purpose. We want to be able to provide cooperation to the extent that it improves public safety generally.
A new video shows that Alex Pretti had an altercation with ICE agents just days before he was killed. We've all seen that footage of him spitting at the car and kicking the light off the back. How does this new information impact your perspective on the investigation and on federal enforcement operations in Minnesota? And I have spoken to some reporters from Minneapolis who do say that the protesters are extremely difficult. They're coming up against ICE. They're aggravating them. It's almost like both sides are so aggressive.
And I think, I want to really focus on there are folks that where there has been, much more interaction that has been challenging and perhaps interfered with some of their operations. I've seen the video that you're referencing, and I've also seen the video of the shooting. And I think the two are separate incidents. Certainly, the damage to the property is certainly a concern and those sorts of things. And yet that has no bearing really on the issue around the shooting. And it appeared at the time of the shooting, Mr. Pretti was actually trying to assist and intervene with a woman who had been shoved down, and as the precursor to his shooting. So, I think there are separate differences. I also think it's important to recognize that, just a week ago, last Friday, 40,000 plus people peacefully protested in downtown Minneapolis, expressing this concern. Without real incident, just raising their concerns about the really high level of presence of ICE in Minnesota.
And you recently oversaw the release of a website highlighting false statements from the federal government. As a corrections leader, how does it feel to publicly counter federal narratives while the investigation is still ongoing and while tensions are so high?
Well, I think we first and foremost have an obligation to the people of our state to make sure that people in Minnesota understand what the position of the Department of Corrections is relative to ICE detainers. And we had to clarify that because obviously the DHS was putting out statements that were inaccurate and incomplete. And so it was really critically important. And it wasn't one, because that can happen where people, mix messages, but this became a theme and was something that we simply had to address. And we had to be in a position where we could show proof that what was being reported by DHS as justification for their actions here was simply inaccurate and incomplete and false in many instances.
Commissioner Paul Schnell, I really appreciate your time with me today on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.